Welcome to Chapter 8, the chapter about our senses, or our special senses, rather. We'll start by talking about our eyes and vision, then we'll cover the senses in our ears, hearing, and balance, and we'll end with a brief discussion of smell and taste. Our learning objectives for this first part are to define what a special sense is, identify the structures of the eye and detail their functions, explain the difference between rods and cones, trace the path of light through the eye to the retina and all the way back to the visual cortex, describe how images are formed on the retina, and talk about eye reflexes briefly. A special sense is a sense that has a specialized organ. This is in contrast to a general sense, which is our sense of touch, for example, or pain. Special senses have a special structure for it. So our vision has eyes, taste has the tongue, smell has our nose, hearing and balance have our ear. Start by looking at the eye. So this is what you would see if you just look deeply into someone's eye. You can see that they have an eyelid with eyelashes. They have a lateral commissure where it comes together on the lateral side, and a medial commissure where it comes together on the medial side. They've got lacrimal curricula, which is where the lacrimal duct is going to drain into. And then if you look at the eye, we've got the white part, which is the sclera, covered by a thin layer called the conjunctiva, and then we have the iris, which is colored, and the pupil, which is black. If we look at the lacrimal gland, so they're going to coat the outer surface with tears, and so it's going to flow across the eye. So you have the lacrimal gland up by our eyebrows, and it's going to make tears that are going to cover and bathe the conjunctiva in fluid, and then eventually drain down. And the lacrimal gland system is connected to our nasal passageway, which is why if you cry a ton, you're going to start snotting. It's not snot, it's tears. Technically, you're blowing tears out your nose. So keep that in mind if you are a loud, voluminous crier. And this is showing that exactly. So the lacrimal gland is located on the lateral side. The tears will flow. They'll go into that caniculus and then drain into your nasal cavity, and you will snot out tears. Let's look at a cross-section of the eye. So you're going to need to know not only what these structures are and what they do, but where they are. So we'll start with structures in the front. We'll move backwards. The eye itself is kind of like a water-filled sac, and it's made of 3 layers. The first outer layer is that fibrous layer. The sclera is the white of your eye, and it's covered in a thin layer. And then we've got the cornea in the front. So the sclera is the white, the cornea is in the iris and the pupil, and this is clear, and it's full of nerve endings. If you ever damage your cornea, it's very, very painful. Then we have the vascular layer, which is next. And so we've got the choroid, which is a pigmented blood-rich layer in the back of our eye. And we have muscles here that are going to hold certain things in place. So we've got the ciliary body, which is going to hold the lens, and then the iris, which is that colored part of your eye, and has an opening called the pupil. And our pupil is going to change shape depending on the brightness of light and the distance we're looking at. So if light is really bright, your pupil is going to constrict to try to regulate the amount of light into your eye. It only wants a certain amount of light to go into your eye. And so if it's very dim, your pupil will dilate and expand to try to soak up as much of that light as possible. And your lens is going to be used for seeing distance. So your ciliary body, the muscles in your eye are going to move and contract and try and bend that lens to focus the light into your eye. And this way you can think of the eye as a camera. So we have in the front the opening of the camera, similar to where we have where the light goes into the camera. The lens of our camera will change shape to try and focus the light in the camera onto the film or the digital film. And it's focusing it in our eye on this back sensory layer. So the third layer is the sensory layer. In the very back, we have the retina, which is our pigmented layer, and it's our neural layer. And the retina, these are where all of the cells are that are going to be our photoreceptors. So they respond to light. So in the same way, a camera is going to focus the light onto the film in the back, and the film will hold the picture or respond to the picture. The retina of our eyes is going to have the neurons that fire and signal vision. And so we have the retina in the very back. We also have an optic nerve. All the information about vision is going to leave via the optic nerve. You should know what cranial nerve that is from our previous chapter. And that optic nerve, where it leaves the eye, creates an area called the optic disc, which is an area where you can't see, actually. It's a human blind spot. And your brain you won't know that you have a blind spot most of the time because your brain fills it in and it creates a picture based on what it thinks is there. You also have an area called the fovea centralis. This is your area of highest acuity. So this is where you can see the best if light is hitting that area. And so again, your lens is going to try and focus light back onto the fovea, and you're going to turn your head without realizing it and try and line up the center of your vision with what you're trying to pay attention to. That's why you look when you hear a sound. You're trying to line up your eyes. Okay, let's talk about what happens in the retina. So we have three major types of cells that are in our retina, and it moves in an inside-out pattern. So the light is going to go all the way to the back of the retina and then kind of move forward through that layer. And it's going to first hit our photoreceptors. We have two kinds of photoreceptors, rods and cones. Rods help us see black and white, and they're used in dim vision, and they're more on our periphery. So we use our rods to see our peripheral vision. Our cones, C for color, C for center. The cones are in the center. Again, they're on that fovea centralis. They help us see color. And we have three types. We've got blues, greens, and reds. And they're going to send the signal. So if they respond to light and those neurons fire, they're going to send that signal to the next layer of cells, the bipolar cells. And the bipolar cells will then send their information to the ganglion cells, and the ganglion cells will send their axons out to become the optic nerve. So it's an inside-out pattern. And again, we have three different types of cones that help us see: blue, green, and red. Most people who are colorblind are either red or green colorblind, so they lose one of these two cones. And we'll talk more about this in class. This is another example of the eye. What I want you to see here is, yes, we talked about the layers, but it's filled with fluid. And we've got in the anterior segment, we've got aqueous humor or aqueous fluid. And in the posterior segment, we've got vitreous humor, which is another fluid. And in the middle, we have the lens. And again, the lens is going to focus the light, and it divides it into that aqueous and vitreous segment. And it helps, the humor is what helps hold the eye in its perfect round shape. And it's going to maintain our interocular pressure. So we want the pressure on the vitreous side to be the same as the aqueous side. Otherwise, the eye will bulge and there'll be pain, and we'll talk about the diseases that. So again, the humors help the eye keep its place, and you want them to be equal, and the lens is going to focus the light onto the back of our retina. So take a minute and see if you can draw an eye and label all the structures of the eye, and then ask yourself what each of them do. Pause this video and do that. Okay, let's talk about a few diseases for the eye. So cataracts is when that lens gets hazy, and the risk factors for developing this are age, diabetes, sunlight. So in the same way we wear sunscreen, we really should wear sunglasses to protect our eyes. And smoking also really greatly increases your risk for cataracts. Glaucoma, on the other hand, is caused by an increase in interocular pressure. So if the pressure from the vitreous side is greater than the pressure from the anterior side, here the aqueous side, the eye will start to bulge, and this can actually damage your optic nerve. And this is usually caused by a blockage in the canal that drains the fluid. And so the pressure will build and build and will start to damage your optic nerve, and it can lead to blindness if untreated. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the other aspects of the eye. So again, this is our eye. It is made for distance vision. So if you're looking out about 20 feet or more into the horizon, the light is going to enter your eye at parallel lines, parallel rays. And the lens isn't really going to have to do anything. At a perfectly relaxed state, the lens can focus the light back onto that fovea centralis. However, if you're looking at something close up, then those lines, the light rays are not going to be parallel. And so your lens is going to have to work to focus on that close-up object and send those rays all the way back to your fovea centralis. And this is called accommodation, where we're focusing on a close object. And this is actually going to work those muscles in your eye, which is why if you spend a ton of time looking at a screen close-up or a book or your phone, your eyes are going to get tired, like literally tired, and that's because the muscles are constantly working to focus in your eye. And so we call it the 20-20-20 rule. For 20 seconds, you want to look 20 feet out into the horizon, and you want to do that every 20 minutes. And this is going to give your eyes a break and help prevent eye strain. Our retina actually works to form the image in a weird way. So your lens is kind of like a lens that you'll see in a microscope, and it reflects and refracts that light back, creating a reversed upside down small image on your retina. And it's actually up to your brain to put the image in the right direction and orientation. So your retina sees the world upside down. Let's talk about that visual pathway. So similar to a lot of things, we have crossing that occurs. And so our right side of the world is going to be viewed, it's going to come in, it's going to cross over a lot of it, and it will be viewed by the left side of our brain. And the left side of the world is going to cross over and be viewed by the right side of our brain. And so we're going to get crossing that occurs. And so this information is going to travel across the optic nerve, will cross at the optic chiasm, will then form something called the optic tract. It will pass through the thalamus, which is our relay station, if you remember from brains, and the thalamus says, this is visual information. Send it on back. And it will go all the way back to our primary visual cortex in our occipital lobe. And again, we have information that's going to be from the right side of the world processed on the left side of the brain, and the left side of the world processed on the right side of the brain. There are some exceptions to this, but this is generally how that works. So if you have damage to the right side of your brain here in the primary visual cortex, you're going to have issues with the left side of the world. Just how it works. Same with other sensory information. There is that crossing that occurs. The crossing here gets a special name called the optic chiasm. Okay, let's talk about some common eye disorders. One of them I have, which is why I need glasses, nearsightedness and farsightedness. So myopia, which is what most people have, it's more common in younger people. This is nearsightedness. If you take off your glasses, the distance is really blurry, but you can bring things close and you can see them. And this is because your eye has a longer horizontal axis than a vertical axis. It's like smushed down. If the opposite smushing happens and you instead have a longer vertical axis and horizontal axis, then you have hyperopia. And this is where you're farsighted. This happens to people when they get older. They need reading glasses and need help seeing close up because it's blurry. If you have an astigmatism, then you have an unequal curvature. And so there's some bump somewhere in your eye. And that usually you can tell because sometimes points will look like lines. So they'll kind of be spread out. Astigmatism. I am a lucky person who has both myopia and astigmatism. I get the extra special glasses. Okay, so that was chapter 8, the first part on vision.